everybody. It's Margie Meach. I'm back for another edition of the Learning to Go podcast. And my guest today is Sam Rogers. He's the author of Just Do the Thing, a guide. And he also creates engaging learning for clients, including folks like Google, Capital One, Deloitte, and AAA. As president of Snap Synapse, he speaks frequently at conferences, sharing his passion for solving the problems that matter and inspiring audiences to action. You might also recognize that he recently conducted a survey on the top podcasts, and we were really honored that we made the top 10 of that list, thanks to listeners like you and guests like Sam. So the reason I brought Sam in today is to talk about that book. So Sam, welcome, and let me just jump right into it. Why did you decide to write Just Do the Thing?
Well, I didn't so much decide to write it as it decided to get written. I was woken up in the middle of the night repeatedly and just had to jot these things down. And it got to be really, really annoying, and I couldn't go back to sleep until I wrote them. And in sharing them with other people and you know, through Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or all those kinds of things, people were finding value in them. But I'm not an insomniac. I have never had this problem really in my life before, but at about, I don't know, sometime around 3 a.m. every night for a couple weeks, ding, time to get up, time to write. So that was the genesis of this. And then after sharing a number of what turned out to be excerpts from the book, I decided to piece it together in part as an honorarium to a dear friend of mine who was killed in a motorcycle accident last year. And we had joked about writing a book like this together. And after he was killed, I decided to go ahead and write it on my own and to make it available to the world, in part to serve the learning and development audience, but also to go a little bit wider than that and just to focus in on what really matters and on what the things are that need to get done, and getting ourselves out of the way a bit of just what needs to happen.
You know, Sam, thanks for sharing that story. And I think you're right. I think this book does reach a very wide audience. I've long suspected that all of us in the learning and development field have this greater intelligence that you speak of inside us, that there is something more, and that most people are walking around with that kind of nagging feeling, I have something to share and I could be doing more about that. So why do you think it's just so hard to just, you know, get out there and do the things that matter in today's world?
Well, I think we get in our own way a lot. We think that it's about us, and we think that because we feel a thing or we have this desire that's maybe a few years old, you know, oh, I thought I'd get to this someday, or all those kinds of things create a kind of psychic dead weight that it's hard to pull forward into the future. It's hard to call something done. And the approach that I took in this book was inspired by a few other works, one of which is the Daodejing, which is something I've been reading over and over since I was about 19 years old. It's about a 2,000-year-old book, and every time I read it, I swear the words are changing underneath. I've never read this before, but in fact, I've been reading it pretty much every day for most of my life. And The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield was also a great inspiration for this book. And then Taming Your Gremlin was kind of the approach that I took, a similar approach of what if it wasn't about us? What if it was about the thing that is being born through us? What does that want? And how can we get out of the way of what is trying to be born? As I mentioned in the, the genesis of this book was very much literally about that. There was something wanting to be born, and I just had to get up and do it. And I didn't have a whole lot of choice around it. I could just lie in bed and wait for the alarm to go off, or I could get up and write and then be done and then go back to bed. I think when we get out of our own way, it's scary. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how that's going to manifest or how it's going to represent us. But I think the more that we do get out of the way, the more that we can embrace that surprise of not knowing what's going to happen, of finding out who we are today and not who we thought we would be today 5 years ago, or, those kinds of larger plans of the, the outdated futures that we hold on to. Oh, I wanted to get to that someday kind of thing. Just letting go and riding whatever is in the current moment, very counterintuitively, I think serves us best. Speaking from my own personal experience, I used to be a guy that compulsively planned everything out. I had the 1 year, 2 year, 5 year plans. I had architected whole arcs of my life for my music career, my work in learning and development. I had all this stuff very well organized. But the problem with that is it doesn't really allow for the surprises of the outside world changing around us to come in, for new relationships and new sparks of innovation to take root. I basically already booked everything up. And it was only once I very purposefully loosened my grip on planning and operated in a much more fluid or improvisatory way that things really started to kick off in life in a lot of good ways. And so this book is kind of a crystallization of that discovery, of that methodology, of my coaching work directly with people, and really the best practices of working with doing productivity coaching for C-level executives in usually the HR kind of training realm is how I get in the door. But yeah, I've enjoyed doing work with a wide variety of people. And this kind of sums it up in this guide, very succinctly and easy to read, kind of useful way.
Okay, so that tells us what we need to do, but of course, the how. You say early on in the book that something like, I'm going to paraphrase you, but every tool is better when you actually use it. And so I don't want you to give the whole book away, but could you give us one example of something you're going to teach us inside your book?
Well, I very literally do give the book away these days. I released it as an ebook on Kindle about a year ago. But since then, I've actually opened it up on Smashwords, so it's a pay what you want kind of thing, and that can include zero if you just want the great information in this book. You can also pay whatever you think the book is worth. I am not trying to get something from this world and from this book. I'm trying to give. And the best way that I know to do that is by making tools that are readily accessible to people, the tools that people will actually use. Those are the only ones that I think are worth investing our time in. And especially in the learning and development field, I think we make a lot of stuff that ultimately the utility of that stuff is kind of an afterthought. It's not what we're really making it for, as how it's going to be used. We have these noble ideas, but as far as one thing to get out of this particular book, it's to get to done, really, to get to finished, to release things to the world, whether you are ready for them or not, whether you think they're ready for the world or not. When the thing says that it's done and it's ready to be in the world, that's what counts. That's what matters. And ultimately, our judge of, does this represent me well? Or is this what I had in mind at the outset? All of that just gets in the way of the thing, and the thing being whatever it is that we're working on, of that actually getting to interact with the world and for people to actually use it. The truth is, when I made this book, I had all sorts of ideas of how I thought people might use it. But in looking at the reviews on Amazon or hearing testimonials from people and things like that, I've been very surprised by how people actually do use it. No amount of my thinking about it was really of value. What's of value is how people really do use it.
Okay, I think you're saying some things that are really quite profound, even though they sound very simple. So I definitely encourage everybody to take advantage of the opportunity to get their hands on your book and the tools inside it, and see what it becomes for them and what it helps them get to done. I think our learning audience, which most of the folks listening to you today will be instructional designers, trainers, teachers, college professors, and anybody who really cares about helping people learn or understanding how people learn. I think there's something really special about that group of people, and you and I are part of that group, is that we spend so much time focusing on the development of others that sometimes we're like what I call the shoemaker's children, and we forget to sit down and take care of ourselves and our own growth. And so that's really why I started this podcast, is I just wanted to interview people who were interesting to me, and I figured that would be of interest to people like me. And so that's how I have found all these wonderful guests and what has brought me to you and to this wonderful book. So I've started it and I'm really enjoying it. And it really is a different way it's a different approach to productivity. I've read a million of them. This is different. This is not just another book about productivity. This is about and again, I'm going to be one of those people who will say something a little different, that you may, I'm going to say it how I use the book is it's a life view book. And that's what it is for me.
Great.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you for all that you're doing with your podcast. You mentioned other productivity books and stuff like that. I'm a productivity junkie for, 15 plus years at least, ever since the Getting Things Done book that David Allen came out with. Even probably before that, I was been very much a part of the productivity world for a long time. But where we so often miss the mark with productivity is in what we're measuring and when we start that measurement. And so, yeah, I appreciate that, a view book. I hadn't really thought of it that way. And another great gift that you're giving me today. Thank you, Marcia.
There you go. So, Sam, what's next for you? What are you working on now that's got you most excited?
Two things, one of which just last month I launched a kind of brain trust of sorts. Since I've been speaking a lot at learning and development conferences and connecting with people all over the world, gathering all of those great minds together and creating a digital learning asset framework that is a new model for looking at the things that we make, so that we're not just focusing on a training impact analysis or something like that for what is fundamentally not training to start with. I think it's an input problem before it's an output problem. So I'm working on that. There'll be an announcement about that on January 30th. And that's definitely very exciting to me. The next step after that, which I'm starting to research and work on a bit these days as well, is a blockchain of learning, basically being able to use licensing at different governmental and organizational levels as a use case for building a distributed kind of database for tracking all of the different licenses that there are and who's licensed for what and all of that in an open kind of way.
Oh, kind of Bitcoin for learning.
Yeah, it's not a form of currency. It's not a money, but really just a way of storing and distributing data so that we can normalize what learning actually means, what it is that we wish to count.
Wow, great. Okay, and how can people get in touch with you and find the book?
Well, for the book, you can look on Amazon for Just Do the Thing, a guide. It's available on Kindle. Also, as I mentioned, Smashwords, which is the largest independent ebook provider. You can pick it up for nothing over there. But my website is snapsynapse.com, SNAPSYNAPSE. My email is also snapsynapse@gmail, and I'm Snap Synapse on Twitter. You mentioned that podcast guide that you're one of the top 10 of the Learning Development Ultimate L&D podcast guides for 2017. I also recently released one for Twitter, specifically for Twitter chat. That's also available on the website. You might want to check that out.
Oh, yeah, I definitely will. And listeners, we'll have all those links in the write-up on our site. So you can go to Learningtogo.info to get more information about Sam and all the great things he's doing. So my guest has been Sam Rogers, author of Just Do the Thing, a guide. And highly recommend you invest a little bit of time in yourself to see if you can pull out the thing that has been waiting for you to let it out. Get out of your own way and, as he says, just do the thing. Thanks, everybody.